Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Ridenauer, today, and I've got another big-time, jam-packed episode in store for everyone at home. Hope you all have been doing well and obviously staying safe. I've got to say, I had quite the weekend with my other job as an announcer and broadcaster. I had 4 games to do over the weekend, and the university I do it for has had to schedule all of their sporting events, actually, in this spring semester because of COVID. So it's been a wild first couple weeks, I would say, back. But anyways, it's good to be here with all of you today. I've got a ton to touch on. Want to get into some general spring training updates, mention some players who might want to start thinking about winding their careers down, and all the sorts. So let's get into it, and I'll first dive right into an update in spring training and mention some players who have been playing really, really well early on, and also any other news going around the league as well. And later on, I'll get into ranking my top hitting pitchers of all time and which hurlers I wouldn't mind having at the plate to bat if I were a manager. Then afterwards, I'll discuss which players I feel should start thinking about retirement, since their numbers and production are clearly down, especially the last few seasons. And then, as always, make sure you stick around for the final few minutes of the show today, as I'll get into another off-season grading, and this time going through the NL West and sharing which teams I think had the best and worst off-seasons, and then also an overall grade for the division in general. So, again, a lot going on today in this episode. Really, really excited to share it with you all, but I want to first get into some of the recent news involving fans in the stands at games this year, and what will be allowed and won't be allowed for one team in particular. Now, as we may or may not know, just kind of a little general overall background story to give kind of the context to the story, the state of Texas has completely lifted all COVID protocols. They have lifted their mask mandate. They have lifted all sorts of capacity things. Pretty much, it's back to normal. There's no masks, 100% capacity. There is nothing that is, I would say, COVID-like down in Texas. So as a result, the Texas Rangers are going to have 100% capacity, or at least open their stadium to 100% capacity at their opening day game, hoping to sell out to the 40-plus thousand capacity stadium. But first off, let's kind of unpack this real quickly, okay? The thing that is kind of interesting is that the Rangers are going to essentially open it up on opening day for everybody to go to, but then they're going to go back to social distancing pods after that. So from April and May, they're going to actually reduce the number of people and will start enforcing those social distancing pods and then kind of work their way back up, I guess. When I was reading this, I had to reread the article to make sure I was reading what I was reading was correct, because it makes no sense to me. That makes zero sense. Why would you open up at 100% capacity on opening day and then try and go back to doing pod-like sitting? I mean, this is not going to work, right? And honestly, I don't really see them selling out to a 40,000-plus crowd, because let's face it, the Rangers had the worst record in the AL last year. They probably will, again, be very bad this year. Maybe they'll be okay. They had some decent pickups in the offseason. I know I've mentioned it before on the show. But let's face it, right? They're not going to be Texas fans are not going to be that concerned, I feel, with the Rangers this year. And I feel like, yeah, people have been cooped up in the house for the last year and some change, but even then, you know, I mean, are the Rangers going to charge a hefty fee for tickets? Because if so, I don't think people are going to want to go, because, again, it's not a good team, and we're coming out of the COVID, and I don't know what everyone's mindset is down in Texas, but, you know, from what I hear, obviously, they don't really mind because, again, the mask mandate has been lifted and it's 100% capacity. So I'm guessing that it will be somewhat of a normal thing. I would love to see what that will look like on TV if they do sell out. I mean, that's going to be an eye-opening experience, and I can't believe I'm saying that would be an eye-opening experience, seeing a full crowd. But when you haven't seen a full crowd in over a year, yeah, it's a little bit, I would say, jaw-dropping. So I'm just more so puzzled about the fact that they're going to revert back to social distancing practices after that. right? That makes no sense because it's kind of like you're skipping steps 1 through 5. You're going to step 6, but then after you are on step 6, you kind of go all the way back to step 1. I mean, it's too much bouncing around. It's kind of like make up your mind. Which one are you going to do? But other teams that I know of, I mean, me personally in Pittsburgh, I know that I believe the Pennsylvania governor said that outdoor sporting events can have 20% capacity, indoor can have 15. And I know I mentioned I went to a Penguins game not that long ago. And so the Pirates this summer will probably have, I believe, around 8,000 fans show up at the ballpark. So, you know, a decent amount of people. I mean, for a Pirates game, that's actually quite a bit. That's usually their normal attendance. I hate to say that, but it's kind of true. But other teams, you know, they're obviously going to try and figure out ways to get fans back in the stands because, I mean, I've seen a lot of things where if there were no fans this year, there would be a lot of teams that could be in serious financial trouble. I mean, these are massive business behemoths, right? These huge teams. I mean, they're worth billions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars. And, you know, a lot of that is generated off of sales, tickets, merchandise, in-stadium sales, food vendors, all of that stuff. A lot of it factors up after an 81-game home season and a home schedule. That's a lot of money if you think about it. Plus, when you get charged an arm and a leg for a drink and some food at a ballpark, it really adds up for a team. So I think that they're all going to have to figure out a way at some point or another to allow fans back just out of the financial necessity. But what the Rangers are doing just doesn't make any sense to me. But anyways, I digress. I want to get into this very random story now, something that's kind of off the beaten path a little bit, but again, still, you know, involving baseball, obviously. But it's a very random story I came across, and it caught my eye. It was very funny, actually. It involves a fan that is a Red Sox fan, and that he's now become known as the pizza thrower in Boston. So, very interesting story here. So the story goes like this. This was in 2007, and a group of friends went to a Red Sox game on Patriots Day, and the gentleman that we will now know as the pizza thrower, his name is Dan Kelly, and he goes with his wife and his friends, go to the game. They were having, you know, drinks beforehand. They were having breakfast. I guess the game starts at 11 on Patriots Day, and as a result, you know, a very early start on Patriots Day. I don't think any other games or any other team starts that early. It's also the same day, I believe, as the Boston Marathon. So they were all having a good time getting ready for the game. And then there was a rain delay during the game. So Dan Kelly goes and gets some pizza for himself and his wife and his friends and this, that, and the other. And another fan, Jason Soul, had been awaiting or had been jawing at him the whole game, the entire game. And he made some very unsavory comments to him. I believe at one point he said, "Your wife has better taste in pizza than she does in men." So pretty brutal stuff to say to a guy. And again, obviously alcohol is involved, so that is never, ever, ever a good ingredient to throw into the mixing pot on that one. That's never a good thing. So eventually Dan Kelly gets really fed up enough to the point where he threw a slice of pizza at him. He literally took his piece of pizza that he had, and mind you, I don't even think he took a bite out of it. He just chucked it at the guy, and it was incredible because the way you saw it happen was because there was a foul ball pop up that was hit towards the left field at foul territory, and it was going towards the stands, and it kind of just tailors over into like literally the little corner area at Fenway Park. If anyone's ever been there, there's this little corner area over in left field that kind of comes down from the outfield wall, comes down towards the left field line, and then it kind of makes this little like divot. And so right in that corner area was where the foul ball was hit. And so somebody was racing over. I don't know who the Red Sox were playing. They were playing somebody. Races over to get it, and the camera caught it because they were trying to see if there was going to be a fan interference, rightfully so. And sure enough, they don't see that. They see Dan Kelly throwing a piece of pizza at a guy in a rain delay, or in the middle of a raining baseball game in Boston. And the announcers were very amused. They started laughing at it. They thought it was very funny, and it became a huge sensation in Boston. And at first, Dan Kelly was very embarrassed. I mean, he wound up getting escorted out of the stadium. Him and his wife had to leave. His wife, I believe he said, was a teacher, and so as a result, she didn't want to have any, FaceTime. She didn't want to have any sort of publicity. Neither did he. But it was really funny because some pizza places actually approached him after this about doing promotions, but he didn't want to do it. And he said later on in the article he kind of regrets saying no because he would have loved to have done that. He would have loved to have, been able to be kind of a spokesperson for a pizza place. But it's very, very interesting and a funny story, too. And, again, it's something just lighthearted and even something to look forward to for this upcoming year. I know You obviously don't want to see people throwing pizza at each other. That's not the greatest thing in having fans back in the stands. But the big thing that I think I'm really excited to kind of see is just that fan interaction, though, right? I mean, you want to see some trash talking in the stands, or you want to hear it from the other fans. It means that at some point or another, things are back to normal. It's a good sign, right? You obviously don't want it to go too far, but when it's at an appropriate level, it's fun. It makes the game a little bit more fun. It makes the game a little bit more interesting. And, at the end of the day, everybody's at a ball game just trying to have fun. But very interesting story about the pizza thrower from Fenway. I believe that's what he's called now, the pizza thrower. And it's a huge thing. I mean, he was all over the internet. He went viral. Everybody knew exactly who he was. He even now, I think, gets people to come up to him and say, hey, you're the pizza guy, right? So that's, a very random thing to become famous for, but nonetheless, very interesting to say the least. So I want to now just wrap up the episode, or wrap up the segment with a little bit of just some players that have been playing really well, some teams that have been playing well, and just any sort of updates from spring training. So I'm looking at the stats here, and first things first, Jock Peterson has been off to a staggering start, and he might be making a very early case for being one of the biggest pickups and maybe one of the sneakiest pickups in all of the offseason. I mean, he's batting .529 right now. He's got 5 homers and 9 RBIs in 17 at-bats. So he's got 5 homers and 17 at-bats. That's hitting a home run in just a little under every 3 at-bats. That's staggering. And then his OPS is a 2.071. So the guy has been just crushing the ball lately for the Cubs. So really like what I've seen out of Jock Peterson so far. Brandon Nemo, he's another guy that I've been very impressed with. And I think that the Mets have something very special on their hands with Nemo. I think that he's going to be a player that is a huge impact guy. I think that he could maybe be a potential difference maker for them down the road. Maybe not necessarily this year, but playing out a hypothetical situation, if they do lose some guys over the next year or two due to free agency or trading or whatever, I think Nemo can step up and be somebody that can, I don't want to say be their savior, but be that guy that, again, rises through the Mets and becomes kind of the star of this team. I mean, he's batting .467. He's got a 1.263 OPS. He's got a home run and an RBI. So, again, not really producing crazy offense. But the fact that he's got a .467 average, I mean, he's only had 15 at-bats. And, again, I know this is a small sample size. You have to kind of take it with a grain of salt. I get that. But nonetheless, let's face it, a lot of these guys in the last year or so, especially in this last offseason, they probably have not had a whole lot of access to anything or really anywhere to go and hit, field, throw, whatever it might be. So for some of these guys to be batting the way they've been batting, it's pretty impressive, I would have to say. And then some other guys that I've been pretty impressed with so far, Michael Chavis, he's been playing well for the Red Sox, batting .333. He's got 2 homers and 18 at-bats, 3 RBIs, and a 1.122 OPS. And then some guys that are on kind of new teams and new faces and new places. Josh Bell, he's been hitting it pretty well, I would say. At one point, he was hitting above 280. Now he's around 267. He's right at a 1,000 OPS. He's got a home run and 3 RBIs. So I think that this is a match made in heaven, quite frankly, for Josh Bell and the Nationals. And I think we saw a glimmer of what he can do in Pittsburgh. And I think that we're going to see the full effect now in Washington, and I think that he can be a huge impact guy for them. And I know that they were looking for depth along throughout the lineup. He clearly brings that, and again, he is another guy that opposing pitchers have to worry about. So then their attention is not just focused solely on Trey Turner and Juan Soto. So again, some very, very good stuff there. Anthony Rizzo has also been playing very well, batting .313. He's got 2 homers and 4 RBIs in 16 at-bats and a 1.164 OPS. So another guy that, hey, he had a really bad year last year. Let's face it, he was not good last year. So it's good to have him back to somewhat of a normalcy. I know he's going to be a free agent after this season, so maybe he's saying, hey, I got to put together a heck of a season this year, because if I'm not in Chicago, like, I want to be on a really, really good team. I want to be on a contending team. I don't want to be stuck with some random team that is in a random market that or whatever it might be. So a good sign that Rizzo is back to somewhat of a normal kind of health. I've seen that Christian Yelich has hit a couple bombs. But then also another player that I'm very intrigued by, and he's one of the top prospects for the Royals. And again, kind of goes back to what I've been saying in previous episodes about how the Royals made some very interesting moves. And I don't know if I want to say that they're going to pay off this year. But I think with the personnel they have coming up through the farm system, and again, I'll get to one of these players right now, and what they've been doing, and also just the additions that they've had, they could be pretty decent sooner than we think. Bobby Witt Jr. has been off to a great start, batting .333, 2 homers, 6 RBIs, .943 OPS. Guy didn't even play last year. He didn't have any stats from 2020. This is technically his first year, if you will, in the major leagues. Now I know he's not actually in the major leagues right now because the season hasn't really started. It's spring training, so I get that. But he's making a case to make potentially the 40-man roster, being able to be on the everyday squad, and I could see that happening. I mean, he is everything that I've heard about him. I mean, he sent a couple balls flying. I believe one home run he hit over 480 feet, or maybe that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but he absolutely crushed a couple home runs. So he's a guy to watch. He's a guy to pay attention to. But then a couple teams that have actually been playing really well, and again, I know this is spring training. I know this is early on, but it's still promising signs to look at. You got the Marlins in the Grapefruit League. They're 4-1 right now. The Pirates have really stood out to me. I mean, they're 6-4 right now. What I've loved about them is just their aggression across the board, both on the base path, from the plate, on the pitcher's mound. The entire team seems aggressive, and I know that they're not probably going to make a huge run this year, and maybe they know that, and maybe they're like, hey, you know what? If we're not going to be good this year, we might as well try and do anything that we can to be successful regardless, us personally or whatever. And they've been able to put up some pretty, I would say, solid games so far, but they've been playing well. I've also been, again, impressed with the Royals. I mean, they're off to a staggering start, 9-3 so far over in the Cactus League. The Cubs are playing well, obviously the Dodgers as well. The Dodgers they've picked up where they left off last year, and they've added more, so we can only imagine what they're going to be like. And then the Padres, they're 5-6 right now. They haven't been off to a great start. Brewers are 6-5. Cleveland Indians are 6-6. So just a couple records, kind of updates on what's been going on around the league. But a lot of teams I feel that are very promising, right? I mean, there's a lot of promise, I think, in the league with some teams. The Blue Jays, another team to really pay attention to. Hey, George Springer actually hit his first spring home run the other day, so another really good sign if you're a Blue Jays fan. So a lot of things to look forward to and a lot of things to kind of keep an eye out for in this upcoming season. And I know that we do have, I would say, about another 3 weeks until the season starts. I mean, once April 1st starts, it's going to be rolling from there. And again, I'm going to be curious to see how guys adjust to going from playing 60 games last year and starting in July to now starting in April and playing a full game or full season schedule. I mean, are we going to see a universal fatigue set in amongst the league, amongst players who are not ready for that grind and not ready for that grueling everyday, constant, just repetitive, whatever, getting ready for the game, mentally preparing for the game, but now they're doing that for 162 games, not 60 games. And I know that's what they're used to doing, but again, getting reacclimated into that, it's going to take some time. It's not going to be an immediate thing. So I think it's important that they had spring training this year because, quite frankly, if they didn't, I mean, I think it would have been a pretty brutal start to the season. And we even saw it in other leagues, right? In other leagues that were coming back out of long layovers or short layovers. The players at first, they were a little rusty. It took a couple weeks for them to work out the kinks. And I think that's what's so wonderful about spring training. It gives those guys a couple weeks to work out those kinks, and then come opening day, they're ready to rock. So very intrigued by this season. I'm really, really excited, and I can't wait for April 1st. I wish that it would already just get here. But anyways, folks, that's going to do it for us in this first segment. Don't go anywhere, because when I get back from the commercial break, I'm going to give my ranking of the top hitting pitchers of all time and which pitchers were not too bad with a bat in their hands. Folks, stay right there. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA, to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenour with you all, and in our first segment, I got into a normal spring training update and sharing which players and teams that have been standing out, but also just sharing some general MLB news. But as always, make sure you stick around for the final few minutes of the show today, as I'll get into another off-season division grading, and this time going through the NL West teams and who had the best and worst off-seasons and what the overall grade will be for the division in the off-season as well. I want to now get into a little ranking of the top hitting pitchers in the MLB of all time and which hurlers had a presence not only on the mound but also the plate. There's a lot of guys that people might not know, people may know, but I'm going to go through the top 10, or at least the top 10 that I feel were worthy enough to be on the list. So starting off, again, this is a player from way back when, Schoolboy Roy. First off, great nickname, right? I mean, this is a really, really great nickname. He got it actually because when he was growing up, he was playing on a men's baseball team as a 15-year-old high school student. So they called him Schoolboy. Great name. Great name. He played for the Tigers, the Dodgers, and the Phillies, and he was a three-time All-Star. He was a World Series champ with the Tigers in 1935. And he actually had a career .263 average with 18 home runs in his career, had 3 seasons batting over 300, and he had 7 years he batted .250 or better. And quite frankly, I was doing this research, and I was kind of going through it, and I was saying, I wonder what the standard, because I always grew up wondering, or always kind of being told the standard of a good average to have as a hitter would be around 280 to 285. If you're hitting 280, 285 or higher, you're in the sweet zone. You're doing a good job. I feel like pitchers, you have to be a little bit more lenient, and I would say if you've got a pitcher that's batting 240, 250, that's pretty good. So for him to have a career average of 263 and he batted over 250 7 different times, that's pretty staggering. And I know back then baseball was a little bit different. Obviously, pitchers were not throwing as hard as they are now, so that's clearly one big sign. But again, maybe that's why back then there was more pitchers that were kind of having to bat, and they were usually better at hitting sometimes. They would have to have somebody come in and pitch because somebody was injured or whatever, and they were normally a good hitter, but they wound up having to pitch because that's all they really had. And so I think nowadays it's a little bit harder because the pitchers do throw harder, and not to mention there's much more kind of injury awareness, if you will, and guys don't want to get injured. But his best year hitting was in 1935, and it was his first All-Star year there. He batted .312 with 3 home runs and 28 RBIs. They were both career highs for him in his career. He was also a pretty solid pitcher overall. He had a .387 ERA for a career, and he had a streak of 19-plus win seasons from 1934 to 1936. Actually, I believe he had 1 year where he was over 20 wins in a season. And he was a consistent 3 ERA guy, so a solid pitcher overall who also could bat. So again, somebody that should go down as one of the better hitting pitchers of all time. And let's face it, if you have a guy that's a pitcher that can actually hit also, that's just one extra bat in the lineup that's reliable, and that's something that is very important. Some teams, when you think about it, you're going through a 9-man rotation or a 9-man starting lineup, you're really only having 8 guys that are reliable hitters. And that 9th guy, that's usually the pitcher, is the throw bat, if you will. But if you have a guy that can put the ball in play and can potentially get on base and be a threat, yeah, I mean, that's definitely a great add to have on any roster. So coming in at number 9, Tom Glavine, the Hall of Famer, a solid hitter. I mean, wouldn't say he was a major power guy by any means, but he was definitely a master with sacrifice hits. He actually led the MLB in sacrifices in 2001, but he had 216 for his career overall. I mean, that's a lot. That is a lot of sacrifice hits, sacrifice bunts, whatever it might be. But there is an art in that. There is some sort of beauty in that, because being able to essentially sacrifice yourself to get out, to move the guy over, but set it up for your next teammate to come up, back to the top of the lineup, that's a pretty impressive thing to do. And being able to do that consistently and that well, not to mention, I think trying to bunt in a Major League Baseball game has got to be one of the scariest things ever. I mean, your bat dips just ever so slightly, and that ball is going to skip off the top of the bat and fly up in your face, and you're going to be in big trouble. So I think that's one of the most nerve-wracking things, and Glavine was able to step in the box and have no fear at all. Now, he hit above 200 in 9 of the 22 seasons he played in, and he had a career-high 289 average in 1996, where he had 22 hits and 76 at-bats. That's a pretty solid average, if you ask me, especially for a pitcher. That's not too shabby. So, again, I think it should speak volume to who Glavine was. He was a great overall athlete. He was a hockey player as well. He actually, if I'm not mistaken, he was drafted into the NHL. He was drafted into an amateur league, and he could have pursued a professional career in hockey, but he wound up pursuing it in baseball. I think he made the right decision, and he's obviously well known as a pitcher. I mean, he was a 10-time All-Star, 2-time Cy Young winner, and he's in the Hall of Fame. But he probably had the least amount of power, I would say, on this list out of all the guys I'll mention, but he had a knack for getting guys over, and he was still efficient at the plate. So worthy enough of being called number 9 in the top 10 pitchers that were the best hitters of all time on my list. Now, getting into number 8, Don Larson. He was more known as a pitcher, obviously, during the Yankees' major World Series runs, winning 2 of them with the team back in the 40s and 50s. He was a World Series MVP, but he also was a pretty solid hitter for the most part. He had a career 14 home runs, batted .242 for his entire career also, and he batted above .250 7 different times in his 14-year career. So half the time he was being a productive hitter, half the time he was being efficient, and he had a career .378 ERA, and an overall, he only just won 81 games in his career. He lost actually a league high at one point, 21 games in 1954. So somebody that I think is synonymous with winning with the Yankees and being a big part of those winning teams, but not necessarily a great pitcher by any means, but he definitely, what he lacked in pitching at times, he definitely made up with in hitting. And it's very, again, ironic to say it, but that's the importance of having a guy that can be that important down, that far down in the lineup. And another thing is, I mean, you don't really see it, but imagine if you could have a pitcher that could hit in the 6 hole, and he was that really good hitter. And we'll actually, once we get towards 2, 3, and 1, or 3, 2, 1, I should say, we're going to hear about guys that could have probably made a case for being a little bit higher up in the lineup than 9th or 8th, that could have actually been in the first 6 hitters because of just how well they were hitting. So coming in at number 7, one of the greatest pitchers of all time, Bob Gibson. I mean, clearly known as a Hall of Fame hurler, right? He was one of the original hard-throwing pitchers. He had that very odd kind of wind-up, and then his follow-through, he'd always follow the side almost. He was an incredible baseball player, though. He was an 8-time All-Star, won the Cy Young 2 times, Hall of Famer like I mentioned, a career .291 ERA, and over 250 wins in his career. So very big difference from Don Larson, who only had 91. So that should, 81. So that should tell you kind of how well and how good Bob Gibson was, right? I mean, Bob Gibson was one of the top-tier pitchers of all time, and he'll always be that. But he was also really good at hitting. He was a major power hitter for a pitcher. I mean, he belted a career 24 home runs. 24. Imagine a pitcher nowadays hitting 24 home runs throughout their career. I don't think that would happen, right? I don't think that's going to maybe ever happen again. I mean, maybe we will see that again, but with just how baseball is nowadays and how hard it is to hit against guys and how hard guys throw, and not to mention the ball is getting deadened a little bit, so that's going to probably play a little bit of a factor. But, I mean, again, Bob Gibson having that sheer power, it translated not only from the mound but also the plate. He batted only .206 for a career, but that's still acceptable considering the fact he had 24 career home runs. He batted a career-high .303 in 1970 with 2 homers and 19 RBIs, and he had double-digit RBIs in 6 seasons with the Cardinals. Clearly a dominating pitcher, but he was feared at the plate as well. I mean, that's kind of been the big thing, is that he was a feared pitcher, but also a feared hitter, and that, I think, also, I mean, again, it does a lot of things for you. It does a lot of things for you. So coming in at number 6, Don Nukem. Don Nukem saw a lot of success in his career, winning a Rookie of the Year award, being named a 4-time All-Star, winning an MVP and a Cy Young award, both in the same season. Not many players have done that before. There's been very few that have done that, so something that is very accomplishing for Don Nukem. Played with the Dodgers for a little bit. He had a career 3.56 ERA, compiled over 1,100 Ks in his career to go along with 149 wins over 10 seasons. So, just about, 14, 15 wins and about 110 or so Ks every single season. Those are pretty solid, consistent numbers for anybody, I would say. But the hitting is what really jumped out, right? Batting a career .271 average, with his best hitting year coming in 1955 when he hit .359. He had 7 home runs and 23 RBIs. He had a 1.028 OPS in 117 at-bats. That last stat is what really jumped out to me, because a lot of these guys, I feel, and you can go back and look on Baseball Reference, which is where I get a lot of my information from, you can see that the at-bats and the sample size, it's pretty small for a lot of these pitchers. Okay, so you have to kind of take that into consideration. But if you've got a pitcher that's taking over 100 at-bats in a season, and he's hitting that well, and he's belting that many home runs, and he's producing that many runs, I mean, that's staggering, right? You do not see that very often. 7 home runs and 117 at-bats and 23 RBIs, that is really hard to do, especially if you're a pitcher. And he batted above 300 in 4 years of playing, and he belted a career 15 homers with 108 RBIs, clearly a feared hitter and pitcher, but 108 RBIs as a pitcher. There's some position players that never even got close to 100 RBIs in a career, and Don Nukem was able to do that as a pitcher. So Right there, that should tell you a lot of what Nukem could do from not only the mound but also the plate. Now, coming in at number 5, we're going to get in the top 5 now, Bullet Joe Bush. And I don't know where these guys get these names from, but they are incredible. I wish that nicknames were like that today, where you had just these random nicknames for these guys, and it was like, where in the world, Pee Wee Reese, these just random names and these random nicknames that these guys would eventually go by. That was literally how they were referred to at times. But Bullet Joe Bush, he was a talented pitcher for the Philadelphia Athletics, the Red Sox, the Yankees, the St. Louis Browns, the Pirates, and the New York Giants. So he bounced around quite a bit. But he had a career 3.5 ERA. He had a career 196 wins over 17 years. So he did quite a bit of damage on the mound, and he won 3 World Series titles as well. But he really excelled at hitting, and he had a career 253 average. He batted above 300 on 6 different occasions. And again, some of those numbers are skewed because he had 10 to 20 at-bats in some seasons. So you do have to take that into consideration. Some of these guys, they only had 50 at-bats in the entire season. And not to mention, they're only playing every 5 days. So that's another thing. So if you're getting 117 at-bats in a season, just like Don Nukem was doing, and you're playing at that high of a level, and you're getting that many at-bats, and you're getting that many reps, and you're still playing that well, you're usually probably going to be seen as a good hitter. And it's a very rare commodity. It's like having a really good hitting catcher, You can have a solid hitting catcher, but a really, really, really good hitting catcher, that's hard to find. But his best hitting season, that's Bullet Joe Bush, his best hitting season was in 1924, where he batted .339 in 124 at-bats. He had 15 RBIs, and then in 1921 also, he batted .325 with 120 at-bats, and he finished his career with 7 home runs. So again, right there, over 100 at-bats in 2 separate seasons, and he did that much damage. That is impressive. That's really impressive. So getting into number 4, Walter Johnson, one of the greatest pitchers of all time, considered literally one of the top pitchers of all time. Hall of Famer, he won 2 MVPs, he won 3 pitching Triple Crowns, and let me tell you what, I did not realize the numbers that he put up, okay? I went back on Baseball Reference, and I looked at some of the records he had. This guy's winning 30-some games in a year, 35 games, over and over and over again. I mean, it is insane, the numbers that he put up and just the sheer winning that he had, And again, I know that I have said before on the show that records can be somewhat misleading for pitchers because it's not necessarily a reflection of how well they do, but more so maybe their teammates do. But just looking at some of his win totals, okay, starting in 1912, he won 33 games, and then from 1912, it goes like this. 33 games, and then the next year 36, and then 28, 27, 25, 23, 23, 20. So he had a stretch of about 7 or 8 years where he's winning at least 20 games, and 2 times he's winning at least 30 games. That is incredible. Not to mention there are some years where he was pitching over 300 innings, and then he was also compiling over 250 strikeouts. That is insane. And again, you don't see those numbers from back then because pitching was just very different back then. So he was a guy that was a little bit ahead of his time. He's led the league, like I said, in wins in his career, ERA, innings, strikeouts, complete games. I believe he has the all-time record for most career complete games. So the guy was just a dominating force on the mound. And talk about a hitter, though. I mean, he belted a career 24 home runs. He had a .235 average over his career. Best year is when he was 36 years old. 36 years old, and he batted .433 with a 1.033 OPS in 97 at-bats. It's one thing when you're a pitcher and you hit that well. It's another thing when you're 36 and you're doing that. That's totally different. And again, back then, I mean, I'm sure that was a very rare. You could have maybe seen guys play much more into their, 30s and whatnot, just because some guys were able to do that. But nowadays, I feel like it's more prevalent because there's more technology, there's more emphasis on, keeping yourself healthy and body movement and this, that, and the other. I can see why nowadays it's a little bit more common, but back then not so much. Now, he batted .348 in 1927 in 46 at-bats, and he had 2 homers and 10 RBIs. So again, a very small sample size, but very, very productive. So that's a huge sign from Walter Johnson. So getting into my top 3 now. Coming in at number 3, Zach Greinke, a guy from these days, a guy from today, if you will. Greinke, he's actually been one of the top-notch, not only pitchers, but hitters also in the game. But in his career, he's got 208 wins in 17 years. I also didn't realize he's played 17 years. That's kind of alarming. I did not realize he's been around that long. He's been a 6-time All-Star. He's won 6 Gold Gloves. He's been a Cy Young winner, and he's actually won 2 Silver Slug Awards. So that's another thing to look at. he's put up solid hitting numbers in his career. I mean, he batted well above 280 in 4 different seasons. 2013 was his best year. He batted .328 from the plate, 58 at-bats, and 4 RBIs. And that was one of the years he won the Silver Slugger. And the other year he won it was in 2019, so very recently, with a .280 average and 50 at-bats. So some solid numbers across the board for Zach Greinke without question. And winning two Silver Sluggers as a pitcher, that's very hard to do. Not many guys can say they did that. But this next guy, talk about winning Silver Sluggers. Mike Hampton, a pitcher that people may or may not know, somebody that probably would have been, I think, a little bit better if he did not have injuries derail his career. But he was literally, I would say, one of the best hitting pitchers ever with a career .246 average. But he was a 5-time Silver Slugger. He won the Silver Slugger 5 different times. He was a 2-time All-Star. He also won a Gold Glove, and he was an NLCS MVP. So he was a very accomplished baseball player overall. And being a pitcher and having those kind of accolades, that's pretty solid. That's pretty solid. And his career was pretty impressive, too. His ERA was okay as a career ERA, 4.06. But he led the NL in wins in 1999 with 22. And he had 100-plus Ks every year from 1995 to 2001. And then in 2001, he had 7 homers, and he finished with a .291 average as well as an .891 OPS. That's pretty impressive. He hit 300 or better in 4 seasons. And I know that some of them were small sample sizes, but he capitalized nonetheless. And the final guy that I want to get into, and again, the reason why I didn't put Mike Hampton at number 1, I put this gentleman at number 1, is because he's got the record for the best all-time career OPS as a pitcher. He has the highest OPS as a pitcher ever. And that's, again, a very jaw-dropping statistic to have. Micah Owings. We might remember him, we might not. He had a very short career, but for the amount of time he played, he made an impact from the plate. Played with the Diamondbacks for a little bit. He had a career .283 average with 9 homers and an .813 OPS, which, again, is the best all-time for a pitcher. He batted above .250 in 3 of his 6 seasons, and he had his best year in 2007, hitting a .333 average in 60 at-bats with 4 homers and 15 RBIs. And he was actually a 1-time Silver Slugger as well. And he's not really remembered as a pitcher, but more so a hitter. And I think that's another thing to make note of, is how he's remembered as not a pitcher, but a hitter, and he was a pitcher. So those are my top 10 guys. Those are the guys that I think were the best hitting pitchers of all time, and, the pitchers that did the best with having the bat in their hands. So I'm very excited to see what the future holds for, hitting pitchers from here on out, and if we'll ever see guys that put up similar numbers to how some of these older guys did way back when. But, folks, that's going to close it out for us in our second segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. Coming up after the commercial, I'm going to share which players should start thinking about retiring after the season, with their production clearly diminishing over the last few seasons. It's been a lot of fun so far, folks, but we got a lot more to go, so don't change that channel. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Great to have you all here still with me today. Jack Ridenauer again. And in the previous segment, I got into ranking my greatest hitting pitchers of all time, and which pitchers who were known for their skills on the mound also had a reputation from the plate. But I want to now get into sharing some players that I think should call it quits after this year, simply because their numbers have started to decrease over the years. And there's been a lot of guys, I would say, that we grew up watching, or at least me personally, I grew up watching and idolizing. that are definitely kind of on the downward trend in their career, and their numbers are not going in the direction that they probably want them to go in. So the first player that I want to mention, who is arguably one of the best hitters in the last 20 years, I would say, one of the best hitters ever, Albert Pujols, right? It's very clear that his numbers are clearly down, digressing. They're clearly going downwards. And there's already been rumors circulating around the league that he will retire after this year. I believe his wife made an Instagram post or made some sort of statement on social media saying that Albert is thinking about retiring and that he might not come back to the game, which, quite frankly, that doesn't shock me, right? You kind of can tell, and if you look at his careers, you can kind of tell that he's had two different careers. It's very interesting. In the first part in St. Louis, clearly a Hall of Famer, and then the second part, not so much. But he's still going to be a Hall of Famer because of just how good he was in St. Louis for that long. I mean, 10 years, winning 3 MVPs. The guy was unbelievable. He was one of my favorite hitters growing up watching, and I know I'm a huge Brewers fan, so I never liked the Cardinals because they would always just trounce on us, but watching Albert Pujols hit was just mesmerizing at times. And you, again, start to see the decline a little bit when he left St. Louis in 2011. He's only had one season while he's been with the Angels that he's batted above 280. And his normal average, what he's averaged for a batting average in the 9 years he's been in L.A., is 253. Very different from when he was in St. Louis, where his average never dipped below 300. I mean, his average was always 300 or higher when he was in St. Louis. And he's only had 3 years in L.A. where he's hit more than 30 home runs. He was only an All-Star one time in 2015. And then prior to being in L.A. and going and being in St. Louis at the first 10 years of his career, he had 10 straight years. 10 straight years of 30 home runs. 30-plus home runs, with 6 of them being over 40 home runs. That's incredible to think about. If you're hitting just 30 home runs year after year after year for 10 straight years, and then you're hitting 40 or more home runs in 6 of those 10 years, 60% you're hitting, 60% of the time during your stint with one team, you're hitting that many homers. That is staggering. And you clearly see the decline, and you kind of feel like he should be hanging it up soon, right? And, he's been really good in his career. He's been very, very talented. He's one of the best hitters of all time. He will go down as one of the best hitters of all time. So really, I don't think there should be anything that he should be ashamed of when he retires. He's won a World Series, multiple. He's won multiple MVPs. He's been an All-Star multiple times. He's put up career numbers. Just alarming numbers, honestly. So he's a player that I could see definitely calling it quits after this year. But then another player for the Detroit Tigers, another guy that, again, I kind of grew up idolizing and being very, shocked by and kind of, jaw-dropped by because he was just such a good hitter, Miguel Cabrera. Now, Miguel Cabrera has still been pretty solid, I would say, towards the, latter half of the last couple years, but it's clear his numbers have taken a sharp turn, right? You look at the numbers before 2015, 2016, and they're way up, and they're really good, and then after 2016, 2017, they kind of start to go down. He's 37 years old, and he's in his 19th year of baseball, and he's a career .313 hitter. So that's one thing to kind of make note of. Prior to 2017, he had only 3 years from 2003 to 2016. So in a 14-year span, he had only 3 seasons where he hit below 300. But since 2017, he has not hit above 300, and his best batting average that he's had since 2017 was in 2018 at a 299 clip. So in all honesty, he's really not been that great of a hitter the last couple years. He's been solid, but he hasn't been the Miguel Cabrera that I think we all know about, that we all are aware of. His home run numbers have also taken a sharp dip, with 2016 being the last year he hit above 30 homers, and the following year he hit 16, right? You kind of see this going up and going down. It's peaks and valleys in his trend chart right now, and I don't think it's trending in the right direction. And then he followed up in after 2017 with only 3 homers in 2018. He had 12 homers in 2019. He had 10 homers in 2020. Obviously, 2020 was a shortened season, but no matter what, that's very, very different from what he was doing before. He was putting up 30-plus homers. Again, very similar to Albert Pujols. He was putting up similar numbers to Albert Pujols when he was in St. Louis, and Miguel Cabrera was doing the same thing when he was in Detroit, and still is in Detroit. I think he can still, produce, and I think that it's not necessarily the level it was before, and with his home run and RBI numbers starting to dip, again, 2016 was the last year he had over 100 RBIs, and before 2016, he only had 2 years that he didn't top 100 RBIs, and since then, he hasn't gone over 60. So that was the one thing that I really noticed, the huge kind of massive just switch in his play and his ability and his hitting. You can definitely tell that old age is starting to set in for Miguel Cabrera, so I definitely think that he should maybe hang it up after this year. Another guy I want to get into with the Houston Astros was with the Detroit Tigers, Justin Verlander. Now again, Verlander hasn't seen a huge dip like the others, but here is the thing, here's the catch. He's coming off a serious injury and he's not getting any younger. So what is his recovery going to be like? How is he going to come back this year? Is he going to be the same Justin Verlander that we have seen in previous years? He had 300 Ks in 2019. That was the highest amount he's had in a season in his career. That was a career high for him. And then the year before that, he had 290 Ks, which was his previous career high. So, yes, when you look at that and when you see that, it's kind of like, well, why would you put him on this list? Again, I'm not saying that he's not going to go down as one of the all-time greats. I'm just saying that if he does not come back this year in full strength, he's 38, 39. How much longer is he going to go until he really can't do anything and he's throwing out his arm and it becomes a hindrance to him and whatever team he's on? And so I think that's why he should maybe think about hanging it up after this year, because if he doesn't come back, and maybe he proves me wrong, maybe he comes back and he is just firing away with that 97, 98, 99 mile an hour fastball that either rises or it tails away or whatever it might do, maybe he proves me wrong. But again, he's not getting any younger, so the recovery is going to be a little bit different as opposed to when he was 28. And I know that he's accomplished, right? 2-time Cy Young winner, Triple Crown winner, Rookie of the Year winner, MVP, 8-time All-Star. The list goes on and on and on. It's just something to watch. It's something to see kind of how he'll bounce back this year and if he'll be able to come back from that season-long injury. And I think that, it's going to be very interesting to watch him play this year with the Astros and how much they use him in the beginning. And not to mention, they also had, again, Valdez is out with a fractured finger. He might miss the whole season. They had to go out and get Jake Odorizzi. So right there, that's, again, another kind of scary thing. I mean, that whole rotation might be falling apart. And I don't know if Verlander can shoulder that load anymore. So I definitely think that maybe after this year, he should think about retiring. If not this year, maybe next year. The next guy that I think he's long overdue to retire, in my opinion, Ryan Zimmerman. And I hate to say that. I really hate to say that about Zimmer, but he's long overdue. He should have retired a long time ago. 2-time All-Star, World Series champion, obviously, Gold Glove winner, 2-time Silver Slugger. But he's had an injury-riddled career, and that's the problem, is that I feel like he came out of UVA. He was a highly touted prospect. He was, I believe, the Nationals' first overall pick in 2005. He's been with the Nationals his entire career. They literally call him Mr. National because he's been with the team so long. But from 2006 to 2013, he had 6 years with 20-plus homers. But since 2013, okay, so 7-8 years ago, he's only had 1 year with 20 or more, which was, again, his career high at 36 in 2017. That was the only year that his home run total topped 20. But his other home run numbers have been 16 or lower. So, again, a very big drop-off, and you can kind of tell that 2017 was a little bit of an outlier for him, possibly. He's just not the same player he was, and in all honesty, those injuries really set in early on, unfortunately, and his average has started to drop. That's kind of been the biggest thing, and, in 2019, his average was 257, in 2018, his average was 264, and then last year, he didn't even play. So is he going to come back ready to go this year? That's going to be the big thing. I'm very, very curious to see if he's going to come back to the form that he was in maybe in 2017, 2018, but I don't think he can get back there because being out of baseball this long, the amount of injuries he's procured over his career, it's just not going to add well, in my opinion. I just don't think it's going to happen. And again, the numerous injuries to his arm, his ankle, his knee, I mean, he's had everything get banged up over the years, and I think that he really needs to maybe start thinking about retirement. I think that he'll enjoy it a little bit more. He's not going to be so sore the next day. And again, he'll leave a good legacy. He'll leave a lasting legacy in D.C. He will be beloved by Nationals fans forever. That will never go away. He will always be the biggest Nationals guy ever. There's no other big National player in Washington, D.C. history other than Ryan Zimmerman. There's nobody bigger than him. So I do think that he might hang it up after this year, and quite frankly, I wouldn't be shocked, and I wouldn't be mad either. And I don't think anyone else should be because I think it's long overdue. So the next guy I want to get into, a guy that's played with my team for quite some time, Ryan Braun. And this is someone I think that next to Pujols is most likely to retire after this year. I mean, he's actually mentioned how he's still working out right now and staying in contact with the Brewers, but he said he isn't really interested in playing right now. And with the uncertainty in COVID, his production going down over the years, the universal DH not going in the NL also, there's a lot of factors that are being played into this. And simply put, Ryan Braun's production is just not the same. He had one of the worst years he's had in his career last season with a .233 average and 129 at-bats. He only had 16 extra base hits, so clearly not the same power hitter he was in the later 2000s, early 2010s that we all remember him for. And he's only been above 280 one time in the last 4 seasons. But prior to the 4 seasons, he was well below 280 only once. That's the thing, is that he's only been above 280 one time in the last couple of years, but then before that, he wasn't dipping below 280 at all. And the home run numbers, they've also seemed a big-time drop-off, big time. With last year being his first season since 2013 where his home run amount was not in not in double digits. It was the first year in his career where his home run numbers were in the single digits. So that's something else to also pay attention to. And he only had 30-plus homers once since 2014. And prior to 2014, he had 5 years of 30-plus bombs. So you can see, again, a lot of these guys, they have clear drop-offs in their career. You can clearly see the not the disconnect, but the kind of the drop-off and just the difference in performance and in play. And the fielding is the same story, right? I mean, he was a much better fielder earlier on in his career, and he's clearly not the same fielder he once was. And you have to admit, age, fatigue, injuries have set in. He's had some injuries over the last few years, and I think that also goes to show you the usage of steroids earlier in his career. Now he's getting injured and banged up, and he can't recover as well because he's not able to use that stuff. So I think that he should maybe think about hanging it up this year because he's had a very good career, even though it's been unfortunately overshadowed with the things that he did off the field and not being truthful about using steroids and this, that, and the third. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because he still was accomplished at some point or another. But I still think that he should definitely think about hanging it up after this year. The final player that I really hate to say that I think he should hang it up because I've always really liked how he's played and just his personality and his character, Pablo Sandoval. And, I mean, what is there to say, right? I mean, he clearly isn't the player he was for a very quick second in the early 2010s. He was a 2-time All-Star from, I think, 2011 to 2012. But he hasn't been above 270 in a batting average since 2014. I mean, his numbers are terrible since 2014. They are nowhere near what they were before that. And he's only had 1 year with double-digit home runs since 2015. And the numbers you just continue to see digress each and every year. And this might be the last hurrah. And, again, he kind of gives me this Bartolo Colon feel where he's trying to play for as long as he can, trying to latch on for as long as he can, and try to extend it and draw it out as much as he possibly can to get every last drop out of his career. I just don't think that there's a point of that anymore. I mean, Sandoval has clearly had injuries over the years, but is also just, pure performance. It just has not been what I think people expect it to be. So I definitely think that he should call it quits after this year. I mean, there's a lot of other guys that I saw on many lists that should call it quits after this year. I saw Jordan Zimmerman. I couldn't believe Jordan Zimmerman's still in the league. I think Gio Gonzalez should maybe start thinking about hanging it up here very soon. There's a lot of guys, that are, again, on the tail end of their career. And I think that's the thing with baseball. It's kind of a misleading thing that guys are saying, hey, you know what, I still feel pretty good. I know I'm getting older, but I still feel okay to do this. And they don't realize it, but their production or maybe the zip that they put on the ball or their reaction time at the plate, whatever it might be, it's just not what it used to be. And maybe to them, they don't really realize it right away, but from the outside, you can kind of say, okay, yeah, he's not the same player he once was. So we'll see which of these guys, or if any of them, decide to retire. I think that Braun and Pujols will. Maybe not Cabrera, maybe not Verlander, but I definitely could see Sandoval also retiring. But folks, that's going to do it for us in this segment. Also, thanks for sticking around as always. But stay right there because we'll be right back after this commercial break for the final segment today, where I'll get into giving a free agency grading and off-season grading for the NL West and give out grades for the different moves made by teams and then the overall grade for the division as well, and share my thoughts on who had the best and worst moves in this offseason. Don't go anywhere, everyone, because we have one last segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup final.
Listen now.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the final segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer still with you. And in the previous segment, I dove right into sharing the players I think that need to maybe start thinking about retirement after the season, and with the slow digression in their numbers over the years. But I want to now close out the show today and discuss some free agency / off-season gradings for the NL West and the teams in the division, then give the overall grades for the division as well, because there were some very interesting moves, a lot of top-heavy moves, I would say, though. A lot of teams that, again, the top tier teams made some big-time moves, and everybody else kind of didn't do much. So I'll start it off with the Dodgers. Obviously, the biggest sign, I would say, out of all the teams in the MLB and really just overall free agency, Trevor Bauer, right? They had a huge sign with Trevor Bauer. They re-signed Justin Turner. They re-signed Walker Buehler. They re-signed a couple other guys. I like the direction they went in. I know that they didn't really need to change anything, I think, because I feel that Dave Roberts kind of went into this year with a, if it's not broke, don't fix it kind of mentality. And I think that's a good mentality to have, because he has had a successful team year after year after year for the last couple of years. They finally won the World Series last year after being there 3 out of 4 years. Getting Trevor Bauer is going to make them really nasty in the rotation. I mean, he's looked really good so far. He's looked really, really good. I mean, his breaking ball has looked incredible. I mean, the spin on that thing has been nothing short of amazing. Re-signing Justin Turner, I think, was essential because, A, he brings a lot of leadership. B, you know he's the heart and soul of that team. He's been with them since 2014. And C, he's still producing. You know, I remember, I mean, literally in my last segment, I talked about players that should think about retirement soon. Turner, he might have another 2 years in him. I mean, he is producing still at a very high level, and I feel that he does not always get the recognition or the appreciation that he deserves. I think that he's overshadowed a little bit by a lot of the talent that's on the team, and I get that. You've got Cody Bellinger, you've got Mookie Betts, you've got Corey Seager, you've got a lot of guys that are going to be really, really good. Clayton Kershaw, you've got a lot of talented players. Justin Turner is literally the heart and soul of that team. He is the heartbeat. They've even called him the heartbeat of that team. And I think bringing him back, he brings back that leadership, he brings back that edge, he brings back what you need in a leader. And if you want to get your team back to that point where they were a year ago, and especially get them through this 162-game season that we're going to have soon, you need to have a guy like that that's going to be prepared and that's going to be able to bring his A-game every single day. And then re-signing Walker Buehler, I mean, again, it's just bolstering up the starting rotation even more, and that's exactly what you want. So overall, I'd probably have to give the Dodgers a B+. I was pretty impressed with what they did here and there, but I think that they could have done a little bit more, right? They lost Kike Hernandez, which I don't think is a huge loss. I think that he was a nice utility player. I think he's one of the better utility guys in the MLB. But they've got so many different weapons that it doesn't really matter. And I've never seen a team that is just kind of so, whatever about what players they might lose and might not lose and whatnot. So I definitely think that, they made some moves that they needed to make. They didn't need to do anything glamorous. They didn't need to do anything special because they know that, hey, we've got the same guys from last year. We were really successful. We're going to keep the ball rolling, and I think that's what they're going to do. So I'm giving them a B+. Next team, Padres. Obviously, you go out, you get Blake Snell, you get Yu Darvish, you sign Mark Melancon, you get Joe Musgrove. You get a lot of pieces. And the hitting is going to be there, right? I mean, no matter what, the hitting is definitely going to be there. And you go out and you get so much pitching. And you kind of could tell that they were on the verge of doing something like that because they go out during the trade deadline last year. They get Mike Clevenger, who I think is one of the better pitchers that people don't really talk about. You have Dinelson Lamet there, who I think is on a very quick ascension towards one of the better pitchers in the MLB. And then you go out and you trade for two guys like Blake Snell and Yu Darvish. And Blake Snell is a Cy Young winner from a couple years ago. And Darvish is, a year removed from being a finalist for the Cy Young. Then you get a guy like Mark Melancon, who, again, I think he's one of the better closers in the MLB that nobody really talks about. And he's been very productive. He was great for the Nationals. He was great for the Pirates. He's been just a really steady guy his entire career. And then Joe Musgrove, somebody that I think has a lot of talent that just hasn't been proven yet. And I think that he was just in an unfortunate market that did not really bring a positive light towards him. And as a result, it was hard for him to get any attention. And I think that Joe Musgrove can now really thrive in his new role and his new team. And I'm excited to see how he does in San Diego. And I mean, again, they didn't need to do much with the hitting. They obviously signed Fernando Tatis to that large deal, and they've got Manny Machado and Tatis signed up for the next 10 years. So the Padres, they might have been planning this for a long time. and they've got these two stars now lining up, both signed for at least 10-year deals, and they're going to be there for a while. If they can keep as much intact as they possibly can, this Padres team, they could dominate the 2020s. I really do believe that. I mean, if we had a hot take of the decade or, hot takes of the decade or whatever, I would say that the Padres are going to dominate the 2020s, especially if they can keep these guys around. Blake Snell, Yu Darvish, all of these pitchers, all of these hitters. They, again, have Tatis and Machado there. They don't have to worry about anything else. But we have seen in recent memory players that have signed long extensions and then they're traded the next year. Nolan Arenado is a perfect example. So I'm going to have to give the Padres an A++. I really am. I mean, I love the moves that they made. They had to make them. I feel that they knew that they were in a situation where they could not pass up on this because of just the talent that they have. And I think that they said, hey, if we want to make a difference, if we want to make a run, we've got to do something about it. We've got to do something about it. And I think that's what they did, is they went out and got more pitching. The hitting was there. They needed a little bit more starting pitching, and they got a lot more starting pitching. So I'm going to give them an A++ because I think that, again, they can hang with the Dodgers. I think that right now, after that before, I don't know if they could because they didn't have the pitching that the Dodgers have. Now they have the pitching the Dodgers have, and I think that they knew that. I think they said, hey, we need to do what that team's doing. That team is a good model to follow. We need to do exactly what they're doing, and that's what they've done, right? I mean, between these two teams that I just mentioned, you've got two guys that are Cy Young winners. You've got another guy that's a perennial all-star, and you've got really good, solid filler players the rest of the way. So these two teams are going to run the NL West, I think, for the rest of the next couple of years, I would say, just because of I don't think anybody else in this division has done much. And I'm going to get into some other teams right now, like the Diamondbacks. Their biggest sign this year was Asdrubal Cabrera. That was about it. They didn't do anything else. And it's head-scratching to me. I've seen a lot of things, though, that the Diamondbacks could potentially have a really good kind of unknown starting pitching rotation down the road because they've got a lot of prospects. When you're a team like the Diamondbacks or the Giants or the Rockies, I feel like, well, at least for the Diamondbacks, I would say, I don't think they have much to lose right now. They're not very good. They don't have anybody that's really, I mean, Ketel Marte's good, but they don't have anybody that's just leaps out and jumps out at you and says, hey, yeah, I'm really, really good. They don't have that player. But I think that what they could do is they could maybe make some moves, maybe make some trades. I wouldn't say they try and rebuild. I think that they're in a rebuild phase, or they're trying to get into a rebuild phase. I do like the add of Asdrubal Cabrera. He does bring some leadership. He played well for the Nationals last year, coming off the bench some. And I would also say that he was the only other hitter on the Nationals team that brought attention away from Juan Soto and Trey Turner. I believe his average was around 260, 270 at one point or another during the season. But the Diamondbacks didn't do anything else. They were virtually quiet the entire time. And I just feel that when you're a team that has nothing to lose, you might as well try and make any move that you can possibly make. So I'm going to give them a D+. Not impressed. I did not think they did anything. I did not think they did anything good. I don't think they did anything interesting. I think it was all very, very lackluster. So I'm giving them a D+. Now, getting into the Giants. The Giants did a couple interesting things. They re-signed Donovan Solano. He avoids arbitration, and I personally think that he is a very disrespected player in the MLB. I don't know why people don't give him more credit, because he was really good last year. I mean, at one point or another, he was batting over 400. He was batting over 400. It's kind of like, hello, wake up. This guy's pretty good. If you're batting over 400 in the MLB, you're no average Joe. You're a good baseball player. So he avoids arbitration with that. Tommy Listel was another good add. I honestly think Tommy Listel is one of the best all-around kind of, again, utility guys, if you will. The word utility player, I feel like you come off the bench and you just do anything that you need to do to get on the field. Tommy Listel is a good baseball player. He can hit well. He can field well. He's a great middle infielder, and that's the thing. You can move him around the infield. You can stick him at second. You can stick him at short. You can stick him at third. He can play in a lot of different positions. And I think that last year when he was, he was playing really, really well when he was with the Athletics and the Angels. I mean, he was very, very good. I also saw that they, again, gave a qualifying offer to Kevin Gausman. He accepted that, so they get him back. I just don't think that they did anything else. But I will say this. About the Giants. The Giants have a lot of guys that are up for free agency next year. I think that they let a lot of guys go. I think that they try and clean house, and they try to free up some cap room, free up some cap space, and say, hey, we're going to go out and we're going to get anybody and everybody. We're going to be really, really being aggressive. I think that if they have a decent year this year, I think that they could be kind of what the Blue Jays did this past offseason, make a couple big splashes that really make a huge difference. Because let's face it, right? If you've got Brandon Belt not re-signing, Brandon Crawford not re-signing, Jeff Samardzij's contract's up, Kevin Gausman, if he doesn't re-sign with this team, that's 4 guys. That's 4, salaries that you don't have to worry about. Crawford, I think, is making around 13, 15 million, something like that. So that's a good bit of change to be taken off of your payroll. And I think that's very important. I think that's very, very important to have. I just feel like they didn't really do anything else. Maybe they didn't need to do anything. Maybe they couldn't do anything else because of just all the money they have tied up with some guys. So I'm going to give them a C+. I know that it's not the best grade. I know it's not the worst grade. It's kind of average. They were a little average in the offseason. But I think that in next year's offseason, I think we're going to see a totally different Giants team. I think we're going to see a Giants team that's aggressive, that pursues some big-time free agents, and that really try to make some big-time moves, make a lot of noise. It's going to be hard because the Padres and Dodgers are just so dominating that, for the rest of these 3 teams, they could have really good years, and they will continue just to get overshadowed unless, God forbid something happens to somebody on the Padres or the Dodgers and they're injured out for a whole year or whatever, and they don't have that player. But at the same time, these other teams, they just don't have the talent, I feel, across the board that the Padres and Dodgers have. So I'm going to give the Giants a C+. And my final team, the Rockies, they just re-signed Raimel Tapia. That was about it. Nothing else, right? And I know I mentioned in my last episode, big make-or-break team. This is a huge make-or-break season for them. They have to go all in, and they have to try and at least have 80, 85 wins, compete for a playoff spot, because Trevor Story is going to be a free agent. And I think that it was, again, kind of a sign this year when they let Arenado get traded that they didn't want to have to pay a whole bunch of money for 2 really good infielders. And, Tapia, he might be that next big name, right? I mean, he batted over .320 last year in over 50 games, so he played really well. And I know it was only a small sample size, but it was a large sample size in kind of the degree that he was in last year, again, with only having played 60 games the entire season. So he could be somebody that they are very happy that they scooped up. I do think that if they don't have a good year, though, Trevor Story will walk, and I think that is going to be an issue for them. That's going to be a major, major problem. If they don't have Trevor Story back, that's a huge hole in their lineup. Charlie Blackmon, if he decides to not re-sign, I think he's up for free agency in a year or 2. Another thing, this team could really fall on hard times sooner rather than later if they don't find some sort of way to win this year. And again, they don't have any pitching. I really think that they have some of the worst pitching in the NL. It's not a good rotation. They don't really do anything for you. They don't have anybody that jumps out at you. And so overall, I'm giving them a D+. Again, another team that I'm giving a D to. I don't think that they did anything. It was a very top-heavy division this year. Just like it was last year, it was a very top-heavy kind of offseason for these teams. And they didn't really do anything. They didn't do anything staggering. They didn't do anything that was, oh my gosh. The only move that the Rockies made that was, oh my gosh, was trading Arenado. That was it. They had to still give over $50 million to help pay his contract. So if Arenado is wanting to get out of trying to get out of Colorado after signing that huge extension, also, I thought it was very interesting the Rockies were very willing to do that. And so that's why that kind of tips me off and says, okay, maybe they're trying to get Story to stick around. They're trying to free up as much space as they can to keep him in Colorado. I just still think they need to prove themselves to him. I think they need to win. I think they need to put it on the field and put it in play to make it actually happen and make it actually come to life. So overall, for the entire division, I'm going to just give it a flat-out B. And the reason why I'm giving it a B is because the Dodgers and Padres really carry this division overall. They really, really carry it. The rest of the teams, though, it's a huge drop-off. It's a clear drop-off. You've got so much talent between 2 teams that honestly, if you think about it, if you take at least 2 guys off of both of the Padres and the Dodgers, let's say you take Corey Seager and Trevor Bauer off the Dodgers, and you take Blake Snell and Will Hosmer off of the Padres, and you put them on other teams and spread them out throughout the division, Padres and Dodgers would still be light years better than the Diamondbacks, Giants, and Rockies. It wouldn't even be fair. It wouldn't even be a competition. And so that's why I'm giving them a B overall, because I just felt like this division didn't really do anything glamorous after the fact. They didn't do anything that was really interesting or really important or whatever it might have been. So overall, a B. I think that there were some teams that could have done a little bit more. I know that they probably were kind of strapped for cash. That has a lot to do with it. Teams like the Rockies probably do rely a lot on ticket sales and in-game concession sales and merchandise sales and all that other good stuff. They really rely on that. And as a result, they don't have that, unfortunately. So overall, I'm giving them a B. I think that there could have been a lot more done amongst other teams. I think the Giants were the only team besides the Dodgers and Padres that made any sort of moves or made any sort of noise. It'll be interesting to see how they do and how the Giants are this year. I think that they'll have a very interesting offseason next year, but the Rockies, out of these teams, they've got a big make-or-break year ahead of them. And the Diamondbacks, I don't know what to think of them. They're kind of just there. That's what they are. You know, it's unfortunate, but that's how it is. But anyways, folks, that's going to wrap it up for us here today. As always, thank you so much for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice little review. That really helps us out. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, we'd also really appreciate that. As always, everybody, thanks so much for joining us today, and until next time, have a wonderful day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.